famous Brits who passed away in 1920. Before we proceed, please subscribe to our channel to support us. Walter Cunliffe. He was born in December 1855 and he died in January 1920. His age was 64 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was septicemia. He was a British banker who established the merchant banking business of London and who was the governor of the Bank of England from 1913 to 1918. During the critical World War I era, he chaired Cunliffe Committee, which reported in 1918 with a plan for the monetary policy of the central bank and government after the war, which helped to shape fiscal policy. Price Jones. He was born in October 1834 and he died in January 1920. His age was 85 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Welsh entrepreneur who formed the first mail order business, revolutionizing how products were sold, creating the first mail order catalogs in 1861, which consisted of woolen goods. For the first time, customers could order by post, and the goods were delivered by railway. John McClure. He was born in November 1837 and he died in January 1920. His age was 82 at the time of his death, and he died after a long illness. He was a Scotsman serving in the Imperial Chinese Navy who, following the death of Admirals Ding Ruchan and Liu Buchan, took command of the Beiyang fleet during the Battle of Wai Highway and surrendered to the Japanese. William Plunkett. He was born in December 1864 and he died in January 1920. His age was 55 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He entered the diplomatic service and was sent to Rome in 1889 as an attaché to the British Embassy there. In 1892, he was appointed in the same position to the embassy in Constantinople and finally retired 2 years later. Dolly Radford. She was born in August 1858 and she died in February 1920. Her age was 62 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was undisclosed. She was an English poet and writer. She married Ernest Radford in 1883 and wrote as Dolly Radford. They had 3 children, one being the doctor and writer, Maitland Radford. Her grandchildren include the town and park planner Anne Maxwell. Ernest Hartley Coleridge. He was born in January 1846 and he died in April 1920. His age was 74 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British literary scholar and poet. He did scholarly work on his grandfather's manuscripts, being the last of the Coleridges involved in their editing. He also took part in the campaign to buy the Coleridge cottage in Neville's Toy for the nation. Charles Lapworth. He was born in September 1842 and he died in March 1920. His age was 77 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English geologist and best known for pioneering faunal analysis of Silurian beds by means of index fossils, especially graptolites, and his proposal that the beds between the Cambrian beds of North Wales and the Silurian beds of South Wales should be assigned to a new geological period, the Ordovician. Edith Holden. She was born in September 1871 and she died in March 1920. Her age was 49 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was accidental drowning. She was an English artist and art teacher. She was born in Kings Norton, Birmingham. She became famous following the posthumous publication of her nature notes for 1906 in facsimile form as the book The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady in 1977, which was an enormous publishing success. Evelina Haberfield. She was born in August 1867 and she died in March 1920. Her age was 52 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was pneumonia. She was involved in Emmeline Pankhurst's militant women's suffrage organization, the Women's Social and Political Union, during the First World War. She worked as a nurse in Serbia. After the war, she returned to Serbia with her companion, Vera Home, to set up an orphanage in Bajina Basta, a town in the west of the country. Mary Augusta Watt. She was born in June 1851 and she died in March 1920. Her age was 68 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was undisclosed. She was a British novelist who wrote under her married name as Mrs. Humphrey Watt. She worked to improve education for the poor, setting up a settlement in London, and in 1908 she became the founding president of the Women's National Anti-Suffrage League. John George Bartholomew. He was born in March 1860 and he died in April 1920. His age was 60 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British cartographer and geographer. As a holder of a royal warrant, he used the title Cartographer to the King. For this reason, he was sometimes known by the epithet the Prince of Cartography. Alex Higgins. He was born in November 1863 and he died in April 1920. His age was 56 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Scottish football player who played for Kilmarnock, Derby County, Nottingham Forest, and the Scotland national team. His son, Alex Higgins Jr., also a Scottish international, was a registered player at this point, although he did not play in the final. Gretchen Riviere. He was born in August 1840 and he died in April 1920. His age was 79 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British artist of Huguenot descent. He exhibited a variety of paintings at the Royal Academy, but devoted much of his life to animal paintings. He was educated at Cheltenham College and Oxford, where he took his degree in 1867. Hugh Thompson. He was born in June 1860 and he died in May 1920. His age was 59 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was heart disease. He was an Irish illustrator born at Coleraine near Derry. He is best known for his pen and ink illustrations of works by authors such as Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, and J. M. Barrie. Thompson inaugurated the Cranford School of Illustration with the publication of 1891 Macmillan reissue of Mrs. Gaskell's Cranford. Ronald Montague Burroughs. He was born in August 1867 and he died in May 1920. His age was 52 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British archaeologist and academic who served as principal of King's College London from 1913 to 1920. Burroughs was also involved in bringing Greece into the First World War as a political and military ally for the United Kingdom. He was a strong, uncritical supporter of Eleftherios Venizelos. Frank Matcham. He was born in November 1854 and he died in May 1920. His age was 65 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was heart attack. He was an English architect who specialized in design of theaters and music halls. He worked extensively in London, predominantly under Moorish empires, from whom he designed the Hippodrome in 1900, Hackney Empire 1901, Colosseum in 1903, Shepherd's Bush Empire in 1903, and Palladium in 1910. Hardwick Rawnsley. He was born in September 1851 and he died in May 1920. His age was 68 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was heart attack. He was an Anglican priest, poet, local politician, and conservationist. He became nationally and internationally known as one of the three founders of the National Trust for Places of Historic Interests, or Natural Beauty, in the 1890s. John Bruce Glazier. He was born in March 1859 and he died in June 1920. His age was 61 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Scottish socialist politician associated mainly with the Independent Labour Party. He was opposed to the First World War and in 1884 was a founder member of the Scottish Land Restoration League, while also joining Social Democratic Federation. Rhoda Broughton. She was born in November 1840 and she died in June 1920. Her age was 79 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was undisclosed. She was a Welsh novelist and short story writer. Her early novels earned a reputation for sensationalism, so that her later, stronger work tended to be neglected by critics, although she was called a queen of the circulating libraries. John Jackie Fisher. He was born in January 1841 and he died in July 1920. His age was 79 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was cancer. He was a British admiral of the fleet with more than 60 years in the Royal Navy. His efforts to reform the service helped to usher in an era of modernization, which saw the suppression of wooden sailing ships armed with a muzzle-loading cannon by steel-hulled battle cruisers, submarines, and the first aircraft carriers. Sir Edmund Elton, 8th Baronet. He was born in May 1846 and he died in July 1920. His age was 74 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English inventor and studio porter, noted for his production of Elton ware at the Clifton Elton Sunflower Pottery. He was the son of the painter Edmund William Elton and Lucy Maria, daughter of the Reverend John Morgan Rice. George W. Anson. He was born in November 1847 and he died in August 1920. His age was 72 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British actor. He specialized in comedy roles and appeared in New York and Sydney, Australia. He appeared in plays of Shakespeare, particularly in productions by Herbert Beerbohm Tree. Erskine Beveridge. He was born in December 1851 and he died in August 1920. His age was 68 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was throat cancer. He was a Scottish textile manufacturer, historian, and antiquary. He was the owner of Erskine Beveridge and Co. Limited, which had been founded by his father in 1832 and was the largest linen manufacturer in Dunfermline, 5. Sir Norman Lockyer. He was born in May 1836 and he died in August 1920. His age was 84 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English scientist and astronomer, along with the French scientist Pierre Janson. He is credited with discovering the gas helium. Lockyer also is remembered for being the founder and the first editor of the influential journal Nature. William Heinemann. He was born in May 1836 and he died in October 1920. His age was 57 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English publisher of Jewish descent and the founder of Heinemann Publishing House in London. His father, Louis Heinemann, was a native of Hanover, Germany, who immigrated as a child. With his family, he became director of Pars Bank. Reginald Farrer. He was born in February 1880 and he died in October 1920. His age was 40 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a traveler and plant collector. He published a number of books, although is best known for My Rock Garden. He traveled to Asia in search of a variety of plants, many of which he brought back to England and planted near his home village of Clapham, North Yorkshire. Maria Alexandrovna of Russia. She was born in October 1853 and she died in October 1920. Her age was 67 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was undisclosed. She was a Duchess of Edinburgh and later Duchess of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, as the wife of Alfred, Duke of Saxe and Coburg and Gotha. She was a younger sister of Alexander III of Russia and paternal aunt of Russia's last emperor, Nicholas II. Sir George Callahan. He was born in December 1852 and he died in November 1920. His age was 67 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an officer in the Royal Navy. During the Boxer Rebellion, he served as a commander of Naval Brigade, sent ashore to form an element of a larger expedition under Lieutenant General Sir Alfred Gassel. The expedition entered, packing and rescued the legations which had been held hostage there. William de Vivelas-Lee Abney. He was born in July 1843 and he died in December 1920. His age was 77 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English astronomer, chemist, and photographer. William was educated at Rossall School, the Royal Military Academy, Woolwich, and joined the Royal Engineers in 1861, with which he served in India for several years. Linton Hope. He was born in April 1863 and he died in December 1920. His age was 57 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a sailor from Great Britain who represented his country at the 1900 Summer Olympics in France, with Lom Curry as helmsman and fellow crew members John Gretton and Algernon Mosley. Hope took first places in both the race of the .5 to 1 ton class and the open class. Thanks for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Have a nice day, and please don't forget to give us a like.